Hello, and welcome to today's live webinar, which follows our 4 previous really successful knowledge sessions, focusing on the business critical subject of equality, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. I am so pleased that you've chosen to join us today, and I really do hope that you are joining with an open mind and ready to receive some interesting information, thought-provoking conversation, and perhaps, if you're really lucky, a little dose of inspiration. My name is Nina Lockwood, and I'm the Chief Exec of Intuitive Talent Solutions. We are a boutique search agency providing interim management and executive search services to our clients in the UK transport sector. For the past 10 years, this has been focused primarily in the rail industry, but I'm delighted to announce that we've recently launched our brand new bus division, which is being led by our very own Caroline Wilson, Head of Client Engagement for Intuitive. As I mentioned, today's webinar is the 5th in the series, and we have once again broken all our previous records with the number of folk registered. So a huge thank you from me personally to you all for your support. We've been overwhelmed by the positive feedback that we've received from the previous sessions and are 100% confident that today will provide food for thought and inspiration too. We also host the Intuitive Insights podcast series, where I'm lucky enough to be joined by members of the transport family who share their career stories and their own views on the current state of play. You can find all the episodes of the podcast on our website, intuitiverecruitment.com, and you'll also find recordings of our previous EDI webinars there too, featuring Lorraine Martins, Sharon Amesu, Alex Hines, DDS Dobson-Smith, Anit Chandarana, Gareth Hind, Natalie Penrose, and Jess Bates. So you'll find all of that under the Insights and Resources tab on our website, intuitiverecruitment.com. Today's conversation will focus on neurodiversity in the workplace and the importance when developing strategies for embedding quality, diversity and inclusion that we take all of our colleagues' needs into account. Our focus will be on the transport sector, including the progress already made, the distance still to go, and the leadership approaches that will get the industry to where it needs to be. As with our previous discussions, inclusive leadership is up front and central. Inclusive leadership is a kind of leadership that values team members, invites diverse perspectives, and creates an atmosphere where people feel that their opinions and their contributions improve the company's well-being. Slowly but surely, inclusive leadership is becoming acknowledged as the most appropriate way to lead an organisation into the future world of work. Mindsets are beginning to shift, and today companies have a greater self-awareness around the demographics of who they employ and who they serve, as well as how the diversity and inclusion of employees and ideas can offer a competitive advantage. Today's discussion will focus very much on what inclusive leadership looks like in terms of our neurodivergent colleagues and what it can achieve when it's done well. I'm mindful of the fact that it's being increasingly talked about, but what I would like to do with today's webinar is to provide some practical examples of what it actually looks like on a day-to-day basis, and some tools you might be inspired to take away and use in your own organisation. I'm over the moon to be joined for this important conversation by 2 individuals who bring a wealth of knowledge to the subject. Ian Chapman is a practice director at Atkins Realis with a strong engineering background and wide-ranging experience in the rail industry. Ian leads a team of around 130 consulting professionals working across all elements of rail systems consultancy. He first joined Atkins as a client director in 2018. Before that, he worked as a business development director at Alstom and previously at Thales. He also spent 14 years working at Network Rail in a variety of managerial roles. Harry Saville is a consulting business psychologist within Lexic, working with organisations on various consultancy projects to support them to become more neuro-inclusive. Prior to working with Lexic, Harry previously worked supporting neurodivergent individuals in schools and in the workplace via one-to-one coaching and assessments, as well as providing training to organisations on neurodiversity and wellbeing to drive organisational change. So the running order for today, just to let you know, we are recording the session, and we do that so that more people can benefit from the information that is shared, and the recordings will come out to everyone who's attended the workshop today. It'll come out to people who had registered but weren't able to attend, and it will also appear on our website. So we are recording it. None of you are visible, so you're not on the screen, but any of the any comments in the chat will be seen by the general public. So just to let you know. We will hear Ian's story first, and then Harry will share some of his knowledge and experience before we have a 10-minute comfort break. When we come back, there will be a discussion about the progress that we've seen, and just as importantly, perhaps more so, what we would like to see in the future in the area of embracing neuro-inclusivity in the transport sector and what that means in practice. This will lead into the Q&A, where I would encourage you to ask any and all questions that you may have on the subject. So the chat room is live. Please pop your questions in there as they occur to you. We may not get round to answering all of the questions, but I do promise you that we will come back to you after the event to any questions that haven't been answered. We will reply to you personally. And a quick shout out again to our Caroline Wilson, who will be present in the chat room throughout the webinar, and will be making sure that your questions are passed on to me at the appropriate time. I'm completely incapable of doing more than one thing at a time. So Caroline is our queen of the chat room, and we'll be making sure that any and all comments that need to be seen during the webinar are passed on. So without further ado, thank you again for joining us for this session this afternoon, for giving us 2 hours of your very precious time. And I really do hope that you take something practical away. My personal objective is that everyone who tunes in gets one thing that they can do differently, and one thing for each of us doing differently is going to start shifting that dial. I'd like to welcome Ian Chapman, Practice Director of Atkins Realis, to the webinar. Ian, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Right, well, thank you very much for joining the call, as Nina has said. So a bit about me, first of all, and I suppose why I'm interested in neurodiversity. Our journey began really, I suppose, when my son was diagnosed as autistic. And since then, my middle son was then also diagnosed as dyslexic, and my youngest is currently going through a similar diagnosis at the moment. So our sort of real understanding of neurodiversity and the challenges associated with it started probably about 10 or 12 years ago now. And really for us, the key thing was really sort of trying to understand the challenges they had and how they perceive the world, and you know, what coping strategies can be applied, how things can just make things a little bit easier. Some of the things we sort of found particularly difficult were the spur of the moment things caused big meltdowns and big problems. And really what we found as soon as we had a diagnosis, the National Autistic Society gave us a lot of training, the early bird training, and that was excellent. And it really put us in the mindset of trying to understand where they're coming from, how the world is perceived, and really what that means is how they can cope with this and how they can perform to their best ability. So for me, my journey started in sort of university, in the workplace, from a purely selfish point of view. I want to make the workplace better for my sons. That's where I'm coming from. And if I can start here in Atkins and do something about it, then that's where I'm coming from. So that's my starting point. Is that helpful as a start?
Brilliant. Ian, it's really helpful because we've all got a story, haven't we? We've all got a personal story and reasons for why we do things. And I think what I'm hearing from you straight away is that need to understand. And once we understand what someone else's lived experience is, we can play our part in helping that lived experience to be more positive. And taking what you've learnt in your home life, in family life, and being able to then translate it into the workplace is a really special contribution as far as I'm concerned. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that on today's webinar. Thank you.
Okay, so onto my slide. So let me move them along. So yeah, as Nina said, nearly 30 years in the railway. From that point of view of wanting to make things better for my sons and the training that we've had from the National Autistic Society, it was then sort of by a matter of extension how that comes into the workplace. The second lot of training we had, which was the Early Bird Plus training, started to deal with, as our children would move to become adults, the challenge they might have. And it's things from on the autistic side where high levels of stimulation, which is the way that people are perceiving the world differently, and it can trigger many different responses. But one of the biggest impacts is the high levels of anxiety, and this can manifest itself in different ways, from people shutting down or sort of drawing into themselves to meltdowns and outbursts and emotional moments, and that continued level of real high anxiety then can lead into challenges with depression and unfortunately high levels of suicide. So it was something that became really important about how we sort of understand how we can make things better, how we can make things a more inclusive workplace, from reducing those triggers, reducing those levels of anxiety, and trying to make things so people can perform at their best. Because there are some real abilities that we see with people who are neurodiverse. Similarly, on the dyslexia side, somebody who's dyslexic will be working at a huge work rate. So their effort they're putting into their daily business of just reading the volume of information we have to get through can really mean that people are just getting very tired, or they need to take longer breaks, they need to take time out. But there are tools, there are mechanisms that can help relieve that and reduce that level of work to people, again, help them perform. So really that was my sort of starting point. The other side of it is we're an engineering company, and there seems to be a correlation between the maths and science subjects and the amount of people who are neurodivergent. There's a correlation in that logical thinking, the creative side that comes along with it as well. And so some of the work we've done in Atkins, I'll talk about what we've done later, but we believe that our population of people who are neurodivergent in Atkins Realis is about 25 to 27%. When you then start to put that together with parents of neurodiverse children, there's probably around about a third of the company have some level of connection with neurodiversity. So we thought, well, okay, that's a big part of what we do. And as engineers, it's really trying to understand, well, if we want to make it a better place for people to be, first we want to make it an attractive place for people to work and stay and get the best out of them. Engineers, when it comes to business, aren't cheap. There's a lot of investment that's going to engineers. So it made sense to really invest in this and understand how we can, first of all, help our people perform well, hopefully make it so that our people want to stay because they recognise it as an inclusive place, and then start to talk much more outside the company about what we've done and really trying to attract people to come and join Atkins Realis. And we feel we've been on a long journey. It's been sort of 4 years now since we really kicked things off, and we've made a lot of changes, and I'm going to talk through some of those changes. But the key thing now is we feel that we're walking the walk. It's not just us talking outside about, isn't it good to be doing things about neurodiversity? We're actually saying we've made these changes, we've made a difference, we've made it a much more inclusive place. So this is where we've got to, but it's a journey we're on, and everyone's on this journey, from awareness through to actually making physical changes to changing the culture and behaviour. So that's where we want to get to, and there's always more to learn. So one of the things we're doing at the moment is really wanting to talk much more openly with industry to share what we're doing, taking it as a very sort of similar approach to the way the industry has dealt with safety in the past. So we want to share what we're doing on a still with pride basis. Take whatever you see today, and have a go at it with yourselves, and share back with us what you're doing, any ideas that you've got, any things that you're doing, because it should be an open share to move us all along, because it is a developing area. It's thinking about this is coming along all the time. So as I mentioned, we launched the Neurodiversity Network in 2019. We've got 12 different employee networks in Atkins Realis. These are set up by the employees and run by the employees for the business. And we have a small budget that gets allocated, and that allows us to do some things, but we also then have to make a business case if we want to spend more money on different elements. We started the process really with following the launch event. We had a collaboration with UCL called the DARE survey, and this was something which didn't ask people, are you autistic, are you dyslexic, are you ADHD? It went through a series of questions to try and understand perceptions and challenges, to make an interpolation of what we thought the population would be of people who are neurodiverse in the company. And on the back of that, it also highlighted some areas that were challenges for people, and it developed a long list of interventions of things that we could adopt, and that really got us kick-started, because it gave us a bit of a plan of how we're going to do things. But then we knew we had a journey to take the business on, and that journey is on the right hand side there. So we said, let's start focusing on awareness, then we can move to the physical environment and starting to change that. And then it's taking a view about social and cultural practice and how we can get things much more inclusive from a personal point of view. So this journey, we started to look at this really from a point of view of, okay, where can we start? Let's form a support group. And we put a Yammer group together. This has now got over 1,000 members to it, and it's a really active Yammer group. We quite often have questions on there from people asking about reasonable adjustments or coping strategies, or problems with the sort of the family side of things, getting a diagnosis. Is it worth getting a diagnosis? What do you do with the diagnosis once you've got it? How to discuss with your line manager about the challenges you have. So that is a really useful group, and we find that there's such a rich discussion on there that is something I would recommend anyone starts, and it's using that as a point at which people can come together, offer their experience, offer their services, and offer their advice. We do a lot of webinars, and we continue to do webinars, and we try and make them coincide with key dates in the calendar, whether it's Autism Awareness Week or ADHD Awareness Month, and it's trying to make sure that we're doing things relevant to those items. We record all of them, and we put them on our SharePoint site. So that picture at the top right there, that's a screenshot from our SharePoint site. It's got a whole load of resources on there. It's where we store all of the things we do, so that people have got a link to anything they want. They can search through it, and they can pull out things. I was searching on it yesterday. Actually, we're looking for a list of different media that are relevant to neurodiversity, and it's something we put together a little while ago with films, books, reading lists, podcasts that are absolutely relevant and people can delve into. And it was a question I've been asked by somebody whether we had a list, and so I was able to search through there and pull that out. We did develop a set of training courses with a company called Optimize, and this was about trying to upskill and again make aware the rest of the business. So we run a system called Workday, which is our HR system. All the trainings embedded in there, and 4 courses are embedded in that Workday system. So we've got an awareness, a 101 course, which takes you through all the different areas of neurodiversity, and gives just an understanding for people about what the different challenges are, how people perceive the world, different coping mechanisms. There's a specific course for managers who are neurodiverse. There's one specifically for those who are recruiting as well. So if you're going through a recruitment process, how you can make your recruitment more inclusive. And that's a really useful course, because that really helps us start to get the people in, because one of the big barriers we have, the first barriers, is that recruitment process, and that's the first point at which we can turn people off from joining the company. So if we can make that more inclusive, that is a really good starting point to getting people into the company and then seeing what we can do. There's also a course for HR professionals, which again, like us, they're learning all the time, and this is a relatively new area. So that is something we wanted to make sure that our HR professionals were sort of brought along on that journey, and they start to see what's relevant to them and how they do their business. I just saw in the chat pane there that somebody's asked for the company name. It was a company called Optimize that we've used, and their course has been good. They've worked on that quite hard to develop, and it's got a lot of really good information in there. The other thing that we also run is an annual awareness survey. We use this in a couple of ways. One is to measure the performance of our network. How are we doing? How are we making things better? And we've certainly seen a change in that. In recent times, we've seen a move from where a lot of the feedback originally was around where people had disclosed their conditions, and it hadn't gone down well with their line managers. We're not getting so much of that anymore. That seems to have moved away. And we use that survey as well to drive what our actions are during the year, what things we want to do and what we want to try and tackle. So it's a really useful touch point that we have each year running that survey, and we can see trends and what's happening. Then we start to move on to the physical environment. So what can we do with actually working here in Atkins Realis? And one of the big things we did was work very closely with estates to look at updating their policies. And it was something that became clear when I'm in Nova North at the moment, and this is one of our newer offices. And there was some quiet desks set aside. And the quiet spaces here are a bit like a little sort of cubby hole. There's no power, no permanent screen. We said, well, okay, it's good that it's a quiet desk, but it's not really a permanent seat you could sit in. So we decided to say, okay, let's now work with estates on their next build, which is the Epsom office, and how can we try and make that a better place? And things started to come along, like the seat booking system. So we had a better, quieter area, which had provision for power sockets, had a proper screen there, so you could spend the day there. And the seat booking system then allowed you to be able to book that seat, so you could then make sure you kept that seat available for yourself, or somebody who wants that consistency of where they sit. They've got a seat booking system, in a hot desk environment, that you need to be able to have that consistency of where you sit every day and be ready for that consistency in your working day. But that got us a way down the line, and we said, okay, well, what more do we need to have? What other things can we do? And that's when we started to look at things like specialist lighting provision. So people who are autistic sometimes can be very sensitive to the flicker of lights. So it's making sure we had specialist lighting available. And this is the sort of things we started to put into our Chamberlain Square office build. So we've now got in there 3 wellbeing rooms. These are multifunctional rooms. They're used for faith network. If people want to go and pray in them. You can use it for expressing milk if nursing mothers are doing that. That's sinks in the rooms as well. But from a point of view of neurodiversity, it's somewhere quiet that somebody can go and just decompress. One of the walls is set up with a big sort of forest scene picture, and that biophilia really helps calm people down. And so it's something, if people are feeling that whole pressure of what's going on, there's always noise in the office. If it's getting too much, then somebody can go and just take the time out, just take time to wind down and reduce that level of anxiety. The other thing we did was reduce visual noise in the office. So in the offices in London, part of the design was having patterns on the carpet. Well, we've taken that away in Birmingham. So it's a plain carpet. The barriers between areas that were wooden slats that divided areas, again, too much visual noise, and they're now got living walls, so plants all across the walls, and again, it helps that biophilia to reduce levels of anxiety. We've also improved the wayfinding signage so that it's much easier to read and find your way around and where you need to go into the offices. So we're really pleased with estates. They've done a really good job, but it is a journey. And so something we then said, well done estates, that's great, but let's see where we want to get to. And so we've now developed the Neuro-Inclusive Office Design Guide. And it was something we wanted to sort of set the bar of, okay, where do we want to get to? What's our ultimate aim? Because that's the journey we want the estates team to come on to, and they can then move through. As they do the next office, it'll get better and better. So we've done that, and that's sort of landed really quite recently, and that's something we we're sort of quite pleased with and quite proud of as a network of trying to sort of like really push the thinking along in that space, and that's something we'll be publishing soon. The other thing we did was look at the software to improve accessibility. So previously to the network coming in place, if you wanted some speech to text or the text to speech recognition software, you had to go through the IT services provision, get it signed up by your line manager, and then have it installed by an IT professional on your machine. We said, well, if you need it, you just need it. So we managed to get that. So it's something now anyone can download, can turn on their machine. You don't have to get any approvals for it, and it's just there and available. So that we thought was a really good step for us. When it starts to come on to social and cultural practice, this is a little bit harder, and this is where things start to talk. Again, it's part of the awareness and part of how we sort of want to see ourselves in the future. So the first one was about relaxed obligation to social commitment. So something we talk about with the teams, and when we start to talk about neurodiversity, when we present to people, is saying, if you quite often you'll see in teams, we're going down to the pub on Thursday night. Come along, it'd be great to have you there. And that sort of pressure on people can be something that they might focus on that for the whole week, as they're dreading this social event on a Thursday evening because they're just not comfortable with it. So it's trying to make people understand that when we do these social commitments or the social events, to say we're going to have a social event on Thursday evening, or we're going to do something in the office. Come along if you want to. It's not making it a mandatory thing that people feel they must and are obliged to do, because we want to make sure that it's relevant and right for the person. When it comes to inclusive recruitment, we tried as a network to look at how we would change our hiring practices, our procedures, and look to make sure we sort of like do it in a new inclusive way. But we found that really struggled, and so what we've done is we've engaged with the recruitment team, and we've taken that on as a let's look at how we can make the recruitment fully inclusive. So not just from a neurodiversity point of view, look at what are the best practices from all of the different networks. And that's what we've done. We've gone around and spoken to all our networks and said, what would you want to see in every stage of the recruitment cycle as the sort of your gold standard of recruitment? What's the wish list? And we've created a really big long list of things we could do. We've boiled that down then to each stage about what things we need to change. And those elements now we've built into a set of actions, and we're working through with the recruitment team, pulling those actions together. We've got a selection criteria pack now as part of the process, which we're trialing, and that's in 2 different practices in Akinji Alice. We're going through those trials, and then that will be rolled out across the company as the guidance then we have for our recruitment. We're looking at how we advertise. We're looking at how we do the onboarding and the keep warm process, and all the way through to make sure we're trying to make our recruitment as inclusive as possible. There is a really good video actually from the National Autistic Society. It's called "Can You Stand the Rejection?" And if you get a chance, have a look at that. It's available on YouTube, and it really puts you in the seat of somebody who's going through a recruitment process and finding how difficult it can be. So I'd really recommend you have a look at that, because all of a sudden you start to see that and think, oh, I get it why our recruitment is so difficult for some people. And one of the statistics about autism in the workplace is that only 17% of people who are diagnosed autistic have a permanent job. That is quite extreme, really. And you'd think there must be ways we can really change that and get these people who are really great thinkers. The benefits that come through from people who are neurodiverse in terms of when they're working well and they can really use their strengths to deliver their work, that's really important. And as companies, we're missing out on that if we're not being more inclusive of what we do. Some of the things we've done around the clothing choice. So again, if people are hypersensitive to certain feel and touch, it's making it so it's much more relaxed about what clothing people want to be able to wear in the office. Same with flexible working hours. So I talked earlier about people who are dyslexic needing that time out, needing time during the day to be able to recover from this high work rate, or others that maybe work at a different pace during different hours. Some people might want to start work later but work till much later in the evening. That might be their best program of work. We've delivered a mentoring program. Again, we thought that was really useful to people to understand, if people are particularly struggling with the emotional intelligence side of things and understanding where to go, that a mentoring program really help people understand how they want to deal with challenges in their day-to-day work, or what their career path needs to be, and how we can open those things up for them. One of the things we looked at as well, and this has been across all the HR policies, was looking at making them more inclusive. And we've gone even from down the accessibility policy, which when we started to look at that was 20 pages of impenetrable text. So how can we make that different? So look at doing it in different ways to say, well, it doesn't have to be text. We could do it as a PowerPoint. We could do it as much different ways of doing things. So we've been through all those policies and gave our input into them. All they're being republished now. We've had a new policy that we've introduced as well called the reasonable adjustments policy. So this is about people sitting down with their line managers and saying, I've got some challenge, I've got some needs, and the company will provide for those needs and make sure that we are making the everyday today work, people perform at their best. Quite often we get some questions around, or my line manager has said, well, your diagnosis is coming up in 3 months, let's wait until that diagnosis, and then we'll look at some reasonable adjustments. And our advice has been, no, you've got a need now. A diagnosis is just a bar. And so if you've got a requirement and a need, then let's fulfill that need, and let's make sure you've got the things you need to do your work right. One of the things we did early in the year is a little bit of fun, and again, it helps promote the Neurodiversity network, is the Neurodiversity coasters. And this is something we took as an idea from a Brazilian barbecue restaurant, where you have the red and the green card for more or less. And we had these plastic coasters produced where you can have them on your desk, and it identifies whether you're happy to be disturbed and you're ready for a chat with somebody, or you turn it the red side up and it says, please do not disturb, because you're focusing on work. So allows people to avoid being disturbed, allows them to focus on their job, and really help with that much more productive work for them. The other thing we've done as well is our creative design group, they've had accessibility training. So this is about making all of our documents and templates much more accessible going forward. And it comes down to things that you wouldn't necessarily expect. If you put this slide deck through a screen reader, it would read everything on the screen. It would read the page number, it would read Atkins Realis in the bottom left. It wouldn't necessarily read it in the right order. But there are ways you can force the screen readers to read in the right order and only read certain parts of the text. So that is the sort of training that our creative design team have had to be able to help make things much more inclusive. So that's our journey. That's where we've been. Nina, did you want to come back in and have a discussion?
There we are. Here I am.
Hello.
Wow. Do you know, you used an expression at the beginning of your slide presentation, Ian, which was share and open share. Mm-hmm. And what you've just done for us is exactly that. I am bowled over, and you and I have had previous conversations, and clearly, you were invited to join us for a reason, because we knew that you'd got some great knowledge and experience in this area. But what you've just shared with us in that slide presentation is massive. There is so much happening within Atkins in terms of the recognition that something needs to be different, but the detail that you've shared with us, and as I said, my objective being very much that people are able to take something away with them from today that they'll be able to do differently in their own workplace. You've given us so much, absolutely incredible. So a massive thank you from me personally for sharing that. And I can see, as I said earlier, I'm not very good at listening and reading the chat, but I've had a sneaky kind of couple of looks in, and I'm just, again, hugely grateful to the people who are sharing their own experiences, asking questions, and also showing your appreciation for what Ian is sharing. This feels like a really safe space to me, and I'm getting the feeling that that's what's being created. So thank you. I'm quite interested in a practical question, which I imagine I'm not the only person who's thinking this. There are some of the things that you've done within Atkins Realis, which can be done for little or no cost. And then there are other things which have required more of an investment. How straightforward was it? Or what would be your advice, maybe a different way of putting it, what would be your advice for people who are going to ask for a budget to make some changes within their own workplace? How did you go about that?
Well, I suppose in some ways we've been quite fortunate. We got an exec sponsor on board. So Nigel, he reports to our chief exec. He's a real advocate for us and what we do, and it's been really helpful and helps us navigate that sort of route if we need some significant funding. And a great example is the training costs are relatively high. At the moment, we've just rolled out the training in the UK as a pilot to see how do we go, how do we publicise it, is it right, the training for us? But we want to roll it out globally, and that's going to be a much higher expenditure. So having Nigel on board really helps us understand how we can put that business case to the exec for that funding. But it's quite easy then to make the business case. When we've got such a high proportion of people in the company who are neurodiverse, it makes it relatively easy to say, well, look how much benefit we can make by getting more out of our teams, by reducing attrition. How much does attrition cost us from somebody that is just not happy with work, or finding it too much, or finding they need something different? It doesn't take many people that you've got to sort of turn back into the workplace to all of a sudden make that money back.
No.
So the business case for all this is really, really strong. And people talk about generally equality and inclusion. There is a strong business case, but in the neurodiverse area, it absolutely is. And the other thing we talk about as well is when it comes to equality, diversity, inclusion, is diversity of thought and the value that brings to the business. Well, somebody who's neurodiverse, it is absolutely diversity of thought. They are thinking in a different way, using their brains in a different way. So again, that brings the real value to what we do as a company. It's all about thought in Atkins Realis. It's all about how we can bring our skills to our clients. And so having people that are working really well, but having that diversity of thought and skills just adds extra value to everything we do and puts us that bit ahead. So the business case works really well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a really strong business case, and we've been hearing about this for as long as I can remember now, in terms of diversity and inclusion. But I think what I'm seeing from what you've shared with us is that the business case has been approved. There you go, there's the budget. But what you've then done with that is what's making the real difference day in and day out. So that kind of, that there can be a tendency to tick a box to say, well, we've been diverse because we've included different underrepresented communities. As you've said, there are 12 different groups, aren't there, within Atkins that are representing different communities. So it's not just about having the group or making sure that X% of your workforce is neurodiverse or female or of an ethnic minority background. It's actually making everybody feel welcome once they're in the organisation. What I'm hearing from you is that it's like open arms. It's like, come on, because we've done all of these changes, and some of the things you've mentioned, once you've mentioned it, are blindingly obvious to me, but I had never thought of them before. Like the pattern on the carpet, that would never have occurred to me. I was doing some reading yesterday and around people when they go through an interview process as a neurodivergent person, if someone's wearing particularly strong perfume, that can throw them off because it's too sensory. There's too much going on, and so it's these kind of details that they're not obvious to the general population, but by you pointing them out and being aware of them and being able to make the changes, sharing them with the rest of us, and then hopefully everyone who's attended today's webinar can go out and share them with some other folk as well. I've got so many questions for you, but I'm trying desperately to keep to time. Anyone who knows me well will know that timekeeping is not my strength, but I'm determined to do it. So I'm going to say thank you again for the presentation that you've just shared with us. You've given us some real gold dust, Ian. You've done open share in the best way I've ever seen it. I know that there are questions on the chat. I know I've written down some questions of my own, but I'll try not to be too selfish. So we'll come back to those later. But for now, Ian Chapman, thank you so much for your presentation and for sharing all of the amazing stuff that is going on within Atkins Realis. Thank you.
No problem.
So next up, we have Harry Saville. Now, I was on a webinar earlier this year, which was presented by Lexic and covered the experience that that organisation has in terms of the transport sector specifically, but everything that they do is to support people to have more neuro-inclusive workplaces. So I am really interested to hear from Harry in relation to just giving us some context. And again, Harry's brief from me has been practical stuff. Please, Harry, tell us what we can go away and do differently. I'm going to hand over to you to take us through your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Nina. And yeah, it was great to hear Ian's experiences and what he's implemented already in his organisation. So hopefully today I'll be going through, what neurodiversity is and the value it adds to the transport industry. And I'm sure I'll be echoing a lot of the messages that Ian's already mentioned. So it'll be good to kind of share what I think is good practice and relate that back to what Ian's put in place already. So a bit about myself. As Nina's mentioned already, I've been working in this area for about in the field of neurodiversity for about 6 years now. So in workplace psychology, 6 years. Started off doing a lot of one-to-one coaching and assessments for neurodiversity and wellbeing in the workplace before moving more to this organisational change. So thinking about what organisations can do differently to be more neuro-inclusive in the first instance, more of that proactive support. So it's good to hear a lot of what Ian was mentioning. There's a lot of what we recommend in a lot of our consultations, which has led me to Lexic as well. So a bit about Lexic. We are an organisation that helps try and build neuro-inclusivity across organisations, whether it be in our team, consultation capacity, looking at training such as workshops and webinars, developing e-learning solutions, so looking at kind of the value of neurodiversity, manager support, helping them understand different kind of diagnosis and what they can do differently for adjustments, consulting on internal policies, procedures, etc. But also we have our one-to-one branch of psychologists or usually occupational psychologists, all trained to help with kind of one-to-one assessments and coaching as well. So we kind of cover those end-to-end solutions. So yeah, very happy to be with you all here today to discuss kind of how that relates to the transport industry. So first of all, thinking about neurodiversity, I've got attention deficit hyperactivity disorder here as an example, just to demonstrate here kind of what we're moving away from when we talk about neurodiversity. So in the past, we've often spoken about neurodiversity in terms of this deficit model, which, as you can see here, thinks about neurodiversity as more of a kind of learning difficulty, learning disability, specific learning difficulty, maybe seeing kind of normal way of thinking, a disordered way of thinking, the right way of thinking, the wrong way of thinking. Even within ADHD itself, the name has a couple of negative connotations included, deficit and disorder. So this model is very much focusing on kind of the challenges people experience, and really not talking about the flip side of that narrative, which is all the strengths and benefits and value they add to organizations, and a lot of kind of strengths people who are neurodiverse will feel that they bring to their role, which is where neurodiversity really comes in. So this is our lexic wheel of neurodiversity, not completely fully encompassing of all neurodivergent diagnosis, but some of the most common ones there. So neurodiversity really refers to just different ways, human variety in how we process information. And it's also used as this umbrella term here for diagnoses such as dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, ADHD, autism spectrum condition, to name a few. So the benefits of this really is that it's I think first of all, thinking about this as more of a spectrum as well, which helps you, even within diagnosis, helps you see kind of the individual aspects of how this might present for different individuals. It is very much a spectrum of a complex spectrum of different characteristics, different strengths, different challenges. Even with the same diagnosis, there may be some commonalities, but maybe some differences in how in the characteristics people experience, and that might differ depending on just themselves, but also the situation they're in and the role they're in. Similarly, people might have dual diagnosis, they might have multiple diagnoses. For example, someone might be dyslexic and dyspraxic, someone might be have ADHD and autism spectrum condition, which all kind of feeds into how that might present for that individual. So a really key message we always try and reiterate is that it's really good to know about different diagnoses and different characteristics might be associated with them. But a really key message you can take away, whether if you're a manager or in the recruitment team, is to not make any assumptions about what someone might be experiencing. It's a very individual experience. The best thing you can do is actively listen to individual circumstances. You might have also noticed that we've got mental health conditions sort of wrapped around the outside there. So we're not mentioning there that mental health is related to neurodiversity or is part of neurodiversity. They're very separate conversations. So in neurodiversity, we're talking about differences in how people process information. Mental health is mental health. It's a health condition. Very separate conversation. But the reason why we've included it here is just to highlight the kind of co-occurrences we see. You can often see there's research out there that shows this higher co-occurrences of mental health challenges with neurodiversity. That a lot of the reasons why we argue that would be is due to that lack of support and maybe due to discrimination we see in the workplace. So it kind of highlights the importance of changes you can make, whether it be in recruitment or what you do on a daily basis in the workplace as well, to help create neuro-inclusive environments, not only just to help people really thrive and be as productive as they can and really tap into those skills, but also from a well-being perspective, manage people's well-being, which is really important. Similar to how kind of those characteristics might present, it might be the same with language as well. So when you're having those conversations, how people might identify as being neurodivergent or having neurodifference is very different. People might use person-first language, they might use identity-first language, such as I am dyslexic or I have dyslexia. They might refer to being neurodivergent or having a neurodifference, whereas many don't. As many people don't see it as being a disability, some people might say it as disabling, and that's totally valid as well. So there's lots of different varieties in how people might refer to their neurodifference. So include that in that conversation, and just kind of asking them how they identify with that is really valuable. Little question for you here now. So please, good to see what you put in the chat. Do you know how many individuals in the UK and Ireland have a neurodifference? A few answers there. Is it 1 in 10, 1 in 30, 1 in 7, or 1 in 100? So good to hear your thoughts. There's a lot for C, 1 in 7, a few for A. Bit of a mixed bag. Yeah, a few for C. 1 for A. So lots of people thinking 1 in 10 or 1 in 7. So the official answer, according to ACAS, this is from 2017, is that it's 1 in 7. So that's about 15%. You can see the breakdown of what that might look like across diagnosis as well. You could argue as well, I think we've seen as time has gone on as well, as awareness changes, as the stigma from that deficit model is broken away. As we're talking more about the positive side of neurodiversity, people feel more comfortable talking about it, identifying those different thinking styles. There's lots of people now who suggest maybe that could be more 1 in 5 or 20% of the population. So you can see that's constantly evolving statistic. And I think if you think about your workplace and how many people that might mean as being who could be neurodiverse, and if even outside of your organizations, thinking about those who want to access that workplace, maybe are struggling to do so. So you can already start thinking about what do we need to do to make our recruitment practices more inclusive, because that's a very high number of people. So you can start thinking, you can start seeing the significance of making that neuro-inclusive. And there's lots of reasons why organisations are starting to try and be more neuro-inclusive and tap into those different skill sets because of the vast variety of value and skills that neurodivergent individuals bring to the workplace. Try to summarise that here in a little graphic. Often you might see, for example, with dyslexia, kind of linked with creativity, innovation, entrepreneurial skills, outside the box thinking. Some research that shows that 35% of entrepreneurs attribute their success to dyslexia or having a diagnosis of dyslexia or dyslexic thinking. You may have seen on LinkedIn they've added dyslexic thinking as a skill you can add, which is really good, kind of flipping that narrative away from the stereotyped just challenges of the reading and writing and more towards the positives. ADHD, you see that hyper focus, especially with deadlines or working under pressure, or areas of high interest, kind of energetic, kind of creating really positive atmospheres in the workplace. Spontaneity, kind of being more adaptable, and also creative as well, kind of being that kind of thinking in different off the beaten path thinking style can lead to more creative ideas as well. And lastly, maybe autism, often associated with kind of logical, analytical thinking, high attention to detail, honest communication. So there's lots of skills there that organisations are really starting to tap into. That's kind of echoed through some examples here. So EY kind of talking about the future skills, the skills for the future, and what we really need to be looking at are the skills we teach people in school, and really what's valuable. And like, for example, sitting still for long periods, writing with nice joint-like handwriting. In a world of AI automation, I think I've heard about AI more in the last 3 months than I have in a long time. So I think it's becoming more part of our lives. Are those skills about creative, innovative ideas, problem solving? Are they the skills that are more valuable for future organisations? And how do we future-proof ourselves for that? And that applies fully for the rail industry and the transport industry as well. It's echoed here as well. Harvard Business Review talking about neurodiversity as that competitive advantage. So looking at the gaps we see or the gaps in talent in certain areas, is something that organisations are really trying to tap into. To summarise there, really kind of seeing that increases in productivity received from individuals who really have tried to tap into those neurodivergent skills. Where they've created neurodiversity and work programs such as JP Morgan Chase, for example. They had their autism work program, had a side-by-side comparison with the neurotypical team, and found with the right flexible way, offering the right flexible ways of working, the right adjustments, they would be able to be much more productive. More innovation, more creative skills, diverse skill sets, better problem solving, better decision making, increases in well-being. If you create that kind of neuro-inclusion for neurodiverse individuals, you create more kind of psychological safety for all, kind of helping to create a safer place for everyone to work, which is what we want to aim for. There's lots of benefits to any organisation, let alone the transport industry. So how does this relate to transport? That's the big question. First of all, looking from a customer perspective, I think some of the challenges you might consider if you look through kind of the barriers that might be in the transport industry. First of all, maybe the accessibility of the services, kind of accessing transport, buying tickets, journey planning, etc. Is there website accessibility? Is kind of text in a neuro-inclusive format? Is it easy to process? Is there options for screen readers or assistive technology? Something that Ian mentioned before, adding that assistive technology to websites, for example, is that available to help it be kind of accessible to neurodivergent individuals who want to access the rail industry or the transport industry? If you think about sensory sensitivities, something that Ian touched on as well, in terms of public transport, and for example, anywhere in transport, in stations or in bus stations, etc. Thinking that feeling of being uncomfortable for some individuals in crowded spaces, those sensory sensitivities of, or maybe sort of large quantities of people, a lot more sounds, the impact of certain lighting, maybe the impact of patterns on certain seating, etc. That will feed into kind of making people feel uncomfortable or overwhelmed in accessing those services. It may lead to kind of that overwhelm, that anxiety, that stress about accessing your customers accessing transport industries or kind of public transport. So as a really good analogy, I saw in an article recently looking at kind of, for example, using the London Underground as an example. If you think about that statistic about it being 1 in 7 individuals who are neurodivergent, if you think about, for example, one of the London Underground train lines, maybe like the Jubilee line, just shutting down, think about the loss of passengers, that would be the impact that would have on the transport, the transport in London. The number of customers, number of employees, the talent that's not accessing the services. So what can we do differently? First of all, thinking about that formatting, screen readers and websites. Sensory sensitivities, could you add more like quieter spaces, quieter coaches, for example? Could you think about the lighting that's been used in those environments? So yeah, lots of little things there to consider. Thinking about employees as well, we link back to the skills that we saw are really valuable from neurodiversity or neurodivergent individuals, and what the value that might add to the transport industry. Think of, first of all, kind of that innovation, problem solving. So neurodivergent people might be able to see alternative possibilities for how to use maybe existing infrastructure, maybe necessary, especially in the rail industry, and have additional insights into the impact of introducing maybe new technologies. It might be easier as well to kind of create environments that empower those who already think differently, have those different thought processes, who can add those new innovative ideas, as opposed to just investing heavily in those system changes. Thinking about kind of verbal processing and rapport building. You often see that with those with dyslexia. I know loads of people I've worked with who are dyslexic, they're very good at kind of verbal processing, communicating verbally, rapport building, problem solving that way. So it can lead to a lot more better customer service. So those in those particular roles, kind of getting better customer satisfaction, increased in people getting what they need from the services. Maybe having preferences for routines and structure may help with creating systems and following kind of procedures and timetables. That hyper focus, again, helping with kind of working with under high pressure or tight deadlines. Data analysis, recognizing patterns, help driving future change or updates or seeing where things can be improved. Also, if there's high passion in the area of transport, can lead to kind of remarkable levels of knowledge in those areas and passion, especially in areas of passion and interest. So lots of things there could be really valuable to tap into. So how do we do that? What do we often see in the recruitment industry? So in terms of recruitment, so we've mentioned kind of how there's value there in terms of neurodiversity in the workplace. But according to some research we saw in one of our, we put together one of our blogs recently looking at the neurodiversity in transport. So it's from the City and Guilds and the National Skills Academy for Rail. They found that the systemic issues in the industry's talent and skills pipeline have created a shortage of trained and talented employees, especially when we need it most. I think with the demand on skills expected to peak around 2025. So Ian, I think you mentioned some statistics around autism in the workplace and amount of those not accessing work, and that's something we've seen as well, and something we've anecdotally heard of qualitatively from people we work with or coach and have assessments with. There's plenty of people I've spoken to who say, I know I can do this role, and I know I've got the skills for this role, but I really struggle to get through that recruitment process or interviews. I really don't do well in them. I think that can be a problem with recruitment, not just in transport, but across the board. I think there can be some rigid, old-fashioned things systems put in place that can exclude a lot of individuals, especially neurodivergent people. So if we look at each of these stages, what could we do differently to help be neuro-inclusive? I think first step before we look at these is, what do we do to attract neurodivergent candidates to apply in the first place? And something that Ian touched on there as well, kind of mentioning sharing what you're doing to become more neuro-inclusive is really important. So sharing what you're doing with networks, sharing what adjustments are available, sharing how you understand the value of neurodiversity. If you think about, for any of us, if we're applying for a new role, if you're maybe a graduate looking to apply into the transport industry, the first thing you do, especially from a neurodiversity perspective, is maybe find out what their stance is, kind of what their programs are in terms of being neuro-inclusive. So sharing that will really help people see that it's a safe place for them to apply. You're going to get those applications before you even get to the job description. Are you attracting the right people? So that's really important. After that, if we look at each of these stages, the job descriptions, application process, assessments, onboarding, for me, the really key part here is how do we add flexibility to each of these stages, and moving away from mindset of catching people out and more towards how do we just get people to give people a safe place to be able to demonstrate their skills and make sure we get the best people for the role. So if you're thinking about job descriptions, for example, thinking similar to what you might consider with accessing for customers, formatting of job descriptions, the accessibility, are people able to use screen readers or use assistive technology? If they prefer process things better verbally, is there an option to maybe talk over the phone as opposed to reading that? The language used, are you being concise and accurate with job descriptions? Obviously, job descriptions very, very well kind of all-rounded, looking for an all-rounded human being, and quite generalist in skills in there, not necessarily very specific to the role. So how do we be more precise and concise with that, really highlighting what the key things are of the role, and using really concise language to help people understand kind of what that entails. Assessments themselves, again, thinking about flexibility, there might be some challenges with kind of completing written assessments within time periods, processing kind of answers in that time, especially under time pressure, or doing it without breaks if there are challenges maybe with focusing for long periods. So how do you offer adjustments or flexibility in there? Or is there alternative ways of doing that assessment? Similar with interviews, the common question we get is, we don't want to share interview questions beforehand because we don't want to give one person an unfair advantage. I don't think that allowing someone to be able to answer the question the best way they can is going to give anyone an advantage. I think it's just allowing people to show what their skills are, instead of people feeling under pressure to do it on the spot. So offering things beforehand, offering kind of questions beforehand, being able to kind of prompt or rephrase questions where needed, to really help people kind of give the answer they need to. I think the end result is you're trying to create an environment where you can get the best person for the role, and I think creating flexibility in those questions as well is really important. Thinking then about onboarding, so linking back to the creating psychological safety, so we did with at the start, and helping people to feel encouraged to apply. Similar with onboarding, how do you outline and signpost what's available when people start? As Ian mentioned there as well, kind of then neurodiversity networks, support groups, what support's available, highlighting all that, what's available, help people see, I know where to go, I can proactively engage with that. I don't feel stress or pressure about disclosing. I don't feel worried about disclosing. I don't feel worried about how it's going to be perceived. I know it's a safe place for me to ask for that support. And even from a manager perspective or a recruitment perspective, how do you proactively have those conversations? Can you engage with people earlier and start that conversation sooner, instead of waiting for people to? I think for a lot of individuals, they often wait until they're maybe in a bit of a crisis if they don't feel comfortable disclosing. So can you help people feel comfortable in talking about that in the first place? Helps them be more confident, helps them be more productive. Everyone wins, really. It's not just for them, it's for everyone. And lastly, that continuous improvement. I think, Ian, you mentioned this as well, kind of the benefits of having that yearly survey. I think even for us, we talk about kind of what's best practice and what could be done best for recruitment, but you learn so much from those who've been through the process as well. So having that ongoing kind of gathering feedback from individuals who've gone through your recruitment process, seeing what you can do differently, having those neurodiversity networks can really offer such a good sounding board and give you so many options in terms of how you can make improvements. So I agree with what Ian said. I think it's a really good starting point, just to get yourself some understanding about what people are experiencing in your organisation and what you can do differently. So I hope that's been insightful in some ways in terms of what you could do differently in your roles in recruitment. But yeah, happy to answer any other questions later as well. So happy to pass back to Nina.
Perfect. Thank you, Harry. Thanks so much for that.
You're welcome.
Really, really interesting. I've been scribbling notes down like mad throughout your presentation, and lots of people have contributed questions as well into the chat. So we've got lots to discuss when we come back after the comfort break, more information to share. My huge thanks as well to Ian and to Harry for sharing their knowledge and their experience in the first part of this session. But also there are so many of you sharing in the chat room that this is such an amazing example of when the power of a group of people or a community come together and want to make a difference, that people are willing to kind of put their ideas into the pot. So I'm very grateful to each and every one of you. I know Michael Whittaker's been really, really busy in the chat room sharing links and so on, as I have a few other people as well. So thank you. Thank you to Ian and to Harry. We've got lots more to come back to after the comfort break. So I do appreciate that you're all busy, you've all got loads to do, but this is a really important subject and there's lots more learning to be done. So we're going to go on a break now. It's 15:36 according to my phone. So can we see you back again at 15:46, please? Go and put the kettle on, do whatever you need to do. You've got 10 minutes to do it. Come back, we're going to have a question and answer session, a debate between me and Ian and Harry covering some of the key points from their presentations, and then a live Q&A session to bring in some of your questions from the chat. Thank you so much. Enjoy the break. I'll see you back in 10 minutes. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to our knowledge session on neuro-inclusivity. I was just chatting with Toby, who is my left-hand person, who sits with me and supports me from a technology perspective on these webinars, because technology is not my thing, and that gives me that extra confidence to know that I can just sit here and chat, because that is my thing, and Toby's there to help just in case anything goes wrong. We've just been having a chat in terms of the first part of the session, and as I've said to you a couple of times already, my main objective for doing these free live webinars for our community is that everybody gets something valuable to take away. And I'm really confident that you're all going to agree that our two speakers, Ian and Harry, have already given us loads of stuff, even before we go into the second part of the session. There's so much there from Ian in terms of the changes that they've made within Atkins to the physical environment, loads of stuff there that I haven't even considered. I want to ask some more questions around the social and cultural practice, because that really fascinated me. And then Harry sharing some more of the kind of the detail and going into the recruitment side of things, which obviously with my hat on, then I'm really fascinated to learn some more about that. So we're going to bring Ian and Harry back in. We're going to have a 20-minute conversation where I'm lucky enough to ask them some questions based on the presentations that they've shared with us. So welcome back to Ian and to Harry. Welcome back to everyone who's been able to join us for this second part of the session. So much stuff that you've shared already. Is absolutely fascinating. It's raised my awareness. This is not a subject that I know loads about, and so I'm learning. I'm on that learning curve with everybody else. So I've already learned loads. So thank you. The physical environment stuff, Ian, I've kind of come across before in some areas, but not in all of them. But one of the questions that I had was around the social and cultural practice. And just of interest to me, and we've all worked in organisations, I'm sure, throughout our careers, where there'll always be people who didn't fancy coming on the Christmas do, or didn't really want to come to the pub or whatever, or whoever's leaving do, etc. Is there an alternative? Do people who don't want to do that, is there something which is a better way of building community within the workplace? What works? So Ian, I'm going to come to you first, if I may, on that one.
Yeah, sure. Can I just check you can hear me first of all? My headset stopped working. Okay, so
I can hear you
swap to
beautifully.
the laptop. Yeah, we do something called a team breakfast, which we start sort of relatively early in the morning, about 8:15 it kicks off, and we host that around are different offices. So in my team, I've got we'll have a London team, a Plymouth team, Birmingham, Glasgow, whatever. And so people get together locally in those offices. We'll have a cup of tea and a bacon sandwich, and we'll sit there and have come together to have a discussion about what's going on, what are the important things, what's happening, a bit of a sort of an inclusivity moment or a safety moment, and then we have like a speaker that comes along to talk to those. It's a way of making it smaller groups, and it's sort of semi-formal. It's not completely a sort of total relaxed environment, so people are still within the bounds of sort of work and feeling formal, but it's not like going to a pub and it being a really noisy environment. It's quite controlled in that sort of space. So it's something we do. It gets people together. People can join still from home if they're feeling they want to just take part from their home office, and that's fine. Though we do try to get people into the offices to sort of like make the most of working together and working with colleagues. It seems to work really well. And there's a nice method. One thing, so with my eldest son, and we've been going around recently doing the university tours and having a look at the different ones. And speaking to Warwick recently, they have an autistic society there, and they run autistic discos. So discos specifically intended for people who are autistic and might struggle with a normal social disco, trying to make it a bit more acceptable and less pressured as an environment. And we're starting to think about, should we do something similar as like a social event for those who are autistic and are sort of struggling with things. And we're looking at running a trial around the Birmingham office just to see if we could arrange something that might be a little bit more easy, something to do specifically for an autistic group. I don't know if that's going to be successful or not, but we thought we'd give it a go.
The thing is, you're giving it a go, aren't you? You've got the idea. It's brilliant that Warwick University are coming up with different ways of helping people to kind of bond in that community sense with things like that. It's making me think of the bizarre experience I had at the Shard a few years ago when a good friend of mine took me to a silent disco. And we all had these earpiece, kind of headphones on, massive big headphones that were lit up in fluorescent colours. Absolutely bizarre experience, because you chose what music you wanted to listen to and you danced to it, but of course it wasn't necessarily the same music that anyone else was listening to. Quite bizarre, but good fun, to be fair. Harry, have you got anything to add into that in terms of the social part of the workplace for people who are neurodivergent and might want to do something different? I mean, they don't want to do anything, but it needs to be different to what neurotypical people may be doing.
I can only echo what Ian was mentioning. Really, I think it's really about creating different opportunities for people to socialise. I think it's very easy for it to be one size fits all, which is similar to the workplace, really, which we avoid that and move more to more flexible ways of doing things. So you often hear in workplaces where it's the same where they'll socialise by having a drink down the pub or something after work, and there could be problems with the acoustics, with people not necessarily wanting to do that, not liking socialising in those environments, whatever it might be. So I think providing opportunities for people to do that in different ways, whether it be in quieter environments, people don't, even from just if they don't want to be drinking, they can do it they can have coffee or just have a morning breakfast or something like that. So I think providing different opportunities for people to socialise is similar to the workplace. Are you providing different ways for people to work in a way that suits them? Are you giving people opportunity to socialise the way that suits them as well? So I think it doesn't even have to use the word neurodiversity or diagnosis. It could just be there's different options here for how we can get together. Choose what suits you. Don't feel like you have to conform to this one way of socialising after work, and don't feel like I'm sure there's plenty of people who are neurodivergent or people on this call as well who've maybe been in those situations where they don't do that and then feel like they're missing out on even just social relationships and even progression, maybe through not missing out on being in those or developing relationships with people in other people in their team, I think, which isn't fair. So I think just giving different opportunities is definitely important. It's a really good point, actually, and I think that you gave us a key message during your presentation, Harry, when you said to us that the really important thing here is don't make assumptions. So we don't go and read a book or watch a video or come on this webinar and assume that you know how your colleagues want to
behave, feel, be treated, etc. within the workplace. The importance of involving people as much as they want to be involved in this discussion and actively listening is so important, because whilst it might be very, very well intentioned to go off and make some changes because, oh, right, okay, well, we know you don't want jazzy carpets, and we know that you'd like a quiet space, and the biophilia walls, I've never heard that expression, Ian, so I've learned that as well today. So we've kind of heard of all of this, but would that help you? Would that help you as an individual, or is there something else that we could do? So I think that's a really certainly a key message that I'll be taking away, is one size does not fit all, and the same in the same way that our lovely fabulous Caroline suggested a few months ago that we might want to do an escape room as a team event. I cannot think of anything worse than doing that. That fills me with dread, just the thought of it. So it's kind of, that doesn't suit me, but actually the rest of the team were really up for it. So it is kind of like, being able to understand that we've got to take into account lots of people's different feelings. One of the other things that I wanted to just kind of stick in the pot was in relation to this accessibility side of things from a transport sector. There's a couple of things that I'm aware of that I just wanted, as I say, just to chuck in to make sure that other people were aware of them, because I think they're brilliant ideas. So Community Rail Partnership in Lancashire have done a brilliant video that is available on YouTube, which we will share the link for. They've done a video for passengers who may be nervous about using the network. I saw this advertised on a poster at Blackburn Station, and it literally takes you through the experience of travelling on train on that network. So what to expect, how it's going to feel, what are the noises, the sensations, etc. So massive well done to Community Rail within Lancashire for that. But also hot off the press last week was a message I saw from Thomas Abelman, who's the Innovation Director at London Underground. They are bringing out Google Street Maps on London Underground. So for people to be able to feel more confident in terms of how they find their way around the tube, you will now be able to use the street maps, which I think is another brilliant example of how the transport industry is responding to passengers' needs for accessibility. And when we say accessibility, we don't just mean wheelchair access or the kind of, the textured paving, etc. All of that's really important, but there's more than one different type of accessibility need. I'm sure you're not surprised to know that I'd love to come and talk to you both about your recruitment processes. So I'm finding this absolutely fascinating, and the fact that we do need to take each part of the recruitment process and look at it from the perspective of how do we encourage more people to want to come and work in our organisation. So from the attraction piece all the way through to the onboarding, and then what happens after that. We've had some questions around what makes a good advert. So at the beginning, so from my perspective, attraction means employer value proposition. If I look at your organisation, does it look like somewhere I would want to work? And where are the clues? So that might be on your website. Are there people that look like me? Has it been written in a way that I can understand? Lots of other factors to take into account. So first and foremost, do you look like somewhere I would want to work? But then in terms of the recruitment process itself, how do we know how to write a good advert? Harry, I'm going to come to you first on that one. How would we know? Where would we go to understand how to write a good job advert for a neurodivergent person?
I would say that looking at, I think looking for neuro-inclusive recruitment for communication is a good starting point. So there's plenty of information out there on formatting and what would be useful from a neurodivergent perspective. Whether it be fonts to use, how you break up text, what to avoid. So I think just starting off with the fonts that are used is always something that's beneficial. Something we've tried to implement in Lexic all the time, whether it be through doing internally through our own emails, etc. Trying to make sure we use fonts that are kind of helpful for processing. but also we've done our own communication audits as well. So I think if you think from, for example, a dyslexia point of view, if someone's experiencing visual stress and there's certain fonts that cause both the characters or the lines to blur, or causing kind of migraines or headaches, etc., or reading off certain coloured backgrounds, is there anything you can do to make that easier to process? Even it can be such subtle things with the fonts used, how you present it, the background colours, etc. Still, little things like that can make a massive difference. And if you add on top of that the format, the accessibility, do you have, since what Ian was mentioning before about using assistive technology, is that available on the recruitment pages? Is there options for screen readers? Is it accessible? Are the actual job adverts or job descriptions accessible in a format that's accessible to those technologies? And then for me, like the language used, I think is really important. I mentioned that before. I think just it's so often you see job adverts that are just very like jargony and not clear about what actually is required. And from a neurodiverse perspective, especially if, first of all, if it's not clear, if it's kind of looking for an all-rounded person that you meet the key criteria, but there's certain things that you feel like, I'm not sure that'd be me, then you'll instantly put people off applying. Even the language used, if it's not clear, because people take things, we struggle with ambiguous or hypothetical or unclear language, then you're also putting people off applying, especially if it's full of jargon. So I think we often encourage organisations to do kind of job analysis of what actually is really important, because so we're all guilty of. I'm sure Lexit could improve. We always try to improve on ours as well, but it's so easy to leave in things that aren't necessarily necessary. So.
Yes, absolutely. And we definitely see that and have seen that for years in terms of a job description. It would not be unusual for us to receive a job description from a client for an assignment that we're helping them with, to see, there are 15 things that are desirable. And it's kind of, well, no, necessary, not desirable. So it's kind of, well, you can't have all 15. You can have 2 or 3. Choose the 2 or 3 that are really important to you. And it's a good point, whether you're writing an advert or whether you're writing a job description, then you need to make sure that the language is appropriate, that there isn't jargon in there, that it is accessible for everybody who's reading it. One of the things, one of the questions that we've had actually from Tom at Cross Country, how do we counter against the often required and stated aim for candidates to have good communication skills? This often rules out neurodiverse candidates and can stop them applying. So how do you overcome that? Ian, have you done anything within Atkins in terms of the adverts and the job descriptions, and specifically in relation to Tom's point on communication skills?
Yeah, it's exactly part of the inclusive recruitment process we're going through at the moment. And as you say, the whole habit of 15 required skills that are in there that are probably the 12 that were there before on the previous version of the job description, and then added another 3 on the bottom. So, and it also, people get into a habit of just putting in there good communication skills, must be a team player, all these sorts of things, just because that's all what we think we should put in a JD.
Yeah.
Do you actually need that to do that job? Is there something you need specifically, good communication skills to do that job is going to be working on? And that's the challenge to put back to people. And we're trying to set a limit on the number of absolute things you must have. We've set the challenge to the business. We've had quite a lot of discussions about this, of getting rid of all the things that say must have. Why do we even need to have must have communication, must have a degree, must have let's describe the job, write what the job is, and then let people make their mind up about what things are needed. So from an inclusivity point of view, I know this talk about neurodiversity as this talk, but from a gender point of view, the more things we put down there as absolute requirements, the more females it's going to put off from applying. And we've seen that's sort of well established. So let's get rid of those and have a description that describes the job, and let people make their own mind up whether they're suitable for doing that job, and get away from the requirements altogether. That's where we'd like to get to. Yeah. But again, it's a journey, and it's a journey with our HR professionals, our recruitment people as well, getting them on that, getting them comfortable with it, getting the line managers comfortable with this move towards that. And I think a jump to that in one go is going to be too hard. Yeah. I think people aren't going to accept it. So it's about us challenging the business about what could we do. Some of the challenges we've been talking about, so we've not done this yet, but we've been talking with our recruiters. We set them the challenge saying, could we put an advert out there that says, we would like to recruit a neurodiverse individual for this job? Now, I don't think there's any chance we're ever going to be allowed to do that. But we know that MI5 recently put out an advert. They were looking for recruiting from a particular ethnic group. Now, MI5 have particular needs for the sort of stuff they do. And we're starting to say, well, okay, if we designed a job that was absolutely suitable for somebody who's neurodiverse, it played to their skill set, we'd put all the support that was around it in that place. Why couldn't we write an advert that would sort of say, we are, neurodiversity would be an advantage or something like that? And so we're getting advice on that at the moment, but it's about us pushing the boundary with our recruitment team to get them on that journey. And like I say, I don't think there's any chance in hell we'll have that anytime soon, but it will be a discussion, a journey, and trying to push what we think is right.
Yeah, we did have a question early doors actually from Jessica, who said, does Atkins positively recruit neurodivergent people? So I guess that's not the same as saying, putting an advert out saying we only want neurodivergent people to apply. But I guess if you're already wording your adverts differently, moving to change the job descriptions to make it more accessible, then there's an encouragement. So I guess that would be positively recruiting.
It's about moving barriers, get rid of barriers. And that's all we do in the Neurodiversity Network. Is everything we do around changing the office will not disadvantage a neurotypical person. There's nothing we're doing which will put anyone on a pedestal or make it easier for somebody to have an advantage over somebody else. It is just taking the barriers away that's stopping people doing showing their best and going for what they need to do. So that's our absolute principle. The other thing we want to try and do is our other aim as a network is we don't want to exist. We want to do ourselves out of business. If we can get the same place where left-handedness was 40 years ago, where people, children used to have their hands tied behind their back or slapped with rulers for using their left hand. Yes. We want to be in the same place with neurodiversity where it's just not a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we could say that for all of the underrepresented communities across the piece, couldn't we? Let's not have a need for employee resource groups or networks, because actually we're welcoming whoever you are, and whatever difference you're bringing to the party, you are more than welcome. I'm going to kind of come back into the recruitment process piece, because you really, really did hit it for me, the nail on the head in terms of the interview process, where we're talking about people coming for an interview and feeling that somebody's going to trip them up. And from my perspective, the interview process, for a start, it's a two-way street. It's not just you as an interviewer assessing me and my suitability. I'm also assessing you. Do I want to come and work for your organisation? And this idea, and somebody shared with me a few days ago that they had asked for the questions before the interview so that it was easier for them to prepare. And they were told no, they couldn't have the questions because that would be an unfair advantage. And to come to your point, Ian, it's about removing the barriers and making it more advantageous across the piece. Having a different approach to the interview where you actively encourage people to be the best version of themselves. So what can we do to help you do that? I'm going to chuck a grenade in and ask you about what you think about psychometric testing as part of an interview process. Harry, I'm going to come to you first. What's your view in terms of psychometric testing?
I think that it depends on, I suppose, the questions. I think when we do our kind of audits on recruitment practices, we'll look at, I think the downside could be maybe that a shorter range of answers doesn't necessarily reflect what someone may want to put. If they don't feel like it fully reflects their answer, they don't necessarily want to tick all of those boxes. So I think they can be useful, but not kind of exclusively. And I think there should be alternatives offered. I think if people don't feel like the answers are reflected in those responses, if they're asked to do them under time pressure, people can feel kind of it's hard to do. So I think when they're given kind of half an hour to complete a test and it's under pressure, it's that in itself. Again, we're looking at people not being given opportunities to reflect their true ability. How they're presented to them, again, is it similar to the job description? Is it done in an accessible way? If it's in a written format, is it something that's going to be hard for some individual to process? So although it's helpful from a recruitment standpoint, just it's easier to mark and grade and move people through. It's not necessarily getting the best responses out of it or getting a true understanding of where people sit. So I think being used as part of the process, but I still think that there should be some flexibility often in how people want to answer those responses or give kind of feedback on how they can do the role. Yeah.
Thank you, Harry. Ian, have you got a view on that? And I'm also interested to hear, in terms of the interview process itself, what changes have you made at Atkins already that you've seen some good results from?
So, for the psychometric testing point of view, it feels to me like another barrier you're putting in place, especially somebody who's dyslexic. If you've got a heavily sort of text-based test you're giving somebody, it's not only going to be putting somebody off, as you sort of say, your job advert is exactly that. It's an advert. You're trying to get people in. You want people to select your company. And one of the things you're doing is chucking a load of text at them in a time-pressured environment. Some people might be really turned off by that and certainly not perform at their best. So I would think, what value are you trying to get out of a psychometric test for somebody that you can't test in another way from either their experience or the interview process you're talking about. But when it comes to what we've done so far in the interviews, so one thing we did do is create a visual guide for the offices. So the idea being, it's already a really pressured day for somebody to turn up to an in-person interview, and we don't do a lot of in-person interviews nowadays. It's much less. But one of the things we did was create this guide, which for each of our offices, there's it gets sent out to the individual, but showing a map to the office. It shows a picture of the front of the office. It shows a picture of the reception desk, a picture of where you might sit while you're waiting to be called through, and then an example of what one of the meeting rooms would look like. So somebody's who's being invited to interview has got a mental image of what it looks like and what it's going to be like, and they can start to plan and think about how that interview is going to go for them. So it's reducing again that level of anxiety that might be triggered by everything being new. At least they've got some sort of view on what it might be like, and a bit of comfort from that. The other thing we've changed in sort of some of the guidance around interviews was we all have glass meeting rooms nowadays, and as you said earlier about the perfume, it's a similar sort of idea. You face them away from the glass when you're doing the interview, so you as the interviewer, you're looking out on the glass. They're not. They're looking at the wall behind you, so they're not having the distraction of what's going on outside, and trying to again reduce that sensory input and allow them to focus on what's important.
I wonder whether it could become more common practice to involve people in that design of an interview process. Do you know, and you may well be doing this already, Ian, through the network within Atkins, but that I often will encourage clients to say, when you look at your interview panel, how diverse is it? So the people that are going to actually do the interviews with the candidates, have you got any diversity of any kind? And quite often I'm told, but we don't have any females who can come who are at that level in the organisation, or we don't have anybody from whatever community. And my advice always is, but you must have somebody somewhere. They don't have to be in a senior level position, but everybody within the organisation will have a contribution to make in order to make this process better for everybody. So that kind of power of the group being able to contribute to the process, I think, is quite important.
On that panels piece, we've found that particularly valuable in our graduate recruitment panels, to have them as diverse, and we've had some quite good results from that this year in getting a much more diverse group coming through. But we had quite a lot of discussion about when we were selecting the panels. We had some comments around, well, that's positive discrimination by us making a panel which isn't representative of the organisation as a whole, because we're still very heavily male dominated and that sort of thing. So we looked at that quite heavily, and it's something which is sort of like called positive action. And actually with the networks, we got quite a lot of good feedback saying, yes, we want this. We want these diverse panels. And okay, they're not representative of the business, but it's a really important point when you're trying to make a step change in your business, trying to get a more diverse group in. that people will feel much happier with a diverse panel there, because that is showing your company as being accepting of diversity and those cultural differences, and the whole sort of making sure you've got a good mix, and you need to make that step change at some point. And so this positive action was something we've adopted and said we should do in all of our panels going forward. So that's a real thing we're trying for.
Yeah, it's definitely a best practice, and I think from everything that I'm reading and experiencing, it's becoming more and more important to people who are entering into their career. So as you said, it may be people coming straight from school, from college or university. It's more important to them than it's ever been to previous generations in terms of what that organisation looks like. And if you don't look like me, and if you look like that it's been the same for the last 50 years in your organisation, it's not going to be as appealing as it might otherwise be. So clearly lots happening in Atkins, Ian, and thank you for sharing that. I'm going to just come back to the questions that I've had. One of the things that I think lit up the chat room, Harry, was when you shared the statistics in relation to the percentage of people who are neurodiverse. And so I think there was a question over, are they people who have been diagnosed? So they are official, that's the official number of people that we know have been through a diagnosis and are neurodiverse, or are we guessing that that's the number?
I think that particular statistic is based off diagnosis within that, would fall under a neurodivergent diagnosis. But then even within that, you could argue then there's probably plenty of people who haven't got a diagnosis who maybe do fall under that, who maybe haven't. There's plenty of people, even in my assessment days, of people who got a diagnosis in their 30s, 40s, 50s, because maybe it wasn't spoken about when they were at school in the same way as it is now. So whereas the younger generation or people coming through graduates now, even when I've spoken to organisations about their recruitment recently, like they're working with people who are much more kind of clued up about neurodiversity and what that entails and what adjustments they need and what is covered under the Equality Act and what they're entitled to ask for, which is great because it means they know what they're entitled to and what they could ask for. It just puts a lot more kind of, pressure isn't necessarily the right word, but it puts a lot more emphasis on organisations to be clued up themselves and what they should be doing. So I can imagine that number's probably larger. And like I mentioned before, it could be 1 in 5 because if there's more awareness, I know I've done countless sessions where people have said, oh, this sounds like me, or this sounds like my dad, or this sounds like my children. And so the more awareness there is, the more that statistic changes. Even, for example, like the autism numbers. I know I was doing sessions like 5 years ago where it's now 1 in 100. It was over a couple of decades. It went from 1 in 2000 to 1 in 200 to 1 in 100. So and that's not just a sudden increase of autism. It's just that people understand what it is. So it's probably the same with all of those. And I think there's probably lots of people who will maybe relate to those different thinking styles if they learn about them and it's accepted to talk about. So the more work we do on this, the better, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that awareness, and I know certainly just from my own personal experience, there are more people that I'm aware of who are going through the diagnosis process and then thankfully sharing that experience and sharing what they thought neurodiversity was or what ADHD was. And so that was, I read something this morning that I was privileged to have shared with me from someone who has had a recent diagnosis, who said, I thought ADHD meant naughty children. They were the kids who couldn't sit still at school. And that's a really good point you made, Harry, in relation to being able to look at the education system and say, perhaps we don't need to sit still and colour in the lines. Maybe we need to be looking at that differently. Well, actually not maybe, we do need to be looking at that differently in order to be fit for skills that we need for the future. Is anybody in the transport industry doing this well? Was a question that we had. Are there any organisations other than Atkins, obviously, because we know that you're doing loads. Any other good examples, Harry, that you've come across where you think people are making a real effort and actually making some real progress?
We were doing some work on this a lot this year, I think, in terms of just understanding more about neurodiversity in transport. So my colleague wrote a blog on the subject earlier this year in the summer. In terms of clients we've worked with, off the top of my head, I'm sure they won't mind me mentioning them, but Go Ahead, I've done a lot of work. I think we already started working with them with Neurodiversity and did some sessions with them. And they've been promoting themselves about kind of what they're doing to be more neuro-inclusive. I think in research I've done, if you look across not just the UK but Europe, there's lots of organisations talking about what they're doing to be an inclusive employer, but not many of them necessarily mention neurodiversity. So, but that's not unique to transport. It's something that we see across all organisations. There's a lot of kind of goodwill starting to happen, but a lot of people are at the front door, kind of the early stages. So the will's there, but they're still trying to work out what they need to do. So, nothing against the transport industry. I'm sure there's plenty of work there to be done, but I think there's a lot of goodwill there, which is starting to happen, which is good.
I'm noticing there's much more awareness, and that's the starting point, isn't it? And the reason that we've done the webinar is to help with that. Let's get more people talking about it, and much more people accepting that they need to learn about it in order to be able to do something different. Ian, you might be able to help us with Paul's question. Are there any emerging technologies or innovations in transport that specifically benefit neurodivergent individuals? So is there anything happening in the tech space that you're aware of?
Well, I mean, the whole sort of text-to-speech and speech-to-text has been a really great help for people who are dyslexic. So the tools, the way they highlight the text as it reads it out, and so somebody who's dyslexic can really help proofread their stuff.
Yeah.
So that's been, but it's been around for a while. I'd say the real big thing, actually, I think is coming around the corner is the whole AI side of things, and the quality of the written word that AI is able to develop is really, really good and impressive. And I can see that being quite a big change coming through, that people will use that more and more to create quality written work. How much effort is somebody who's dyslexic going to have to put into things in the future when you've got something which is putting this written word together? So their creativity there, the real strengths they have can shine, and they're not being limited by getting the written word down. So I think that's sort of really coming along. It's not, it's improving all the time as well. It's not quite there. There's some, clunkiness to it, but it's not far off now.
From your perspective, Harry, any technology or innovation in that area that you think that you're seeing on either happening now or on the horizon that you can give us a glimpse of?
Again, I'll echo what I think that's my most used phrase today. I'll echo what Ian's saying, but it's very true. I think even in my days of doing coaching with people, sometimes just any assistive technology like any text-to-speech, like read and write or driving software for kind of people who are better at articulating their ideas, but I get to write down for them. That can save people, if they process things better that way, just so much time. I think there's people I've worked with, they say it's cut their admin time down to like 10% of what it used to be. So even those softwares in the past are so valuable, and they're getting more easily accessible. I think now that even when I started doing this, the ones that are available on Microsoft weren't that great, but I think they're really improving now. So if you're looking, even just from anyone who's listening today, if you were looking for easy accessibility features you can suggest to people on Word, on email, people can use right now, the dictation function, the read aloud function, they can really make a massive difference. But yeah, as there's colleagues I've got who've been testing out the AI features, as Ian mentioned, about just to write reports and see what they're like, and they do seem scarily good. So I think it's great in one way, but maybe we should be worried for our futures. But yeah, it's scarily good. But yeah, so I think that's always going to make a massive difference in the future, to cut down that admin time even more.
Yeah, I have a strong belief and confidence that human beings will always be required, Harry, in each process that we have. We are coming to the end of our session, so I'm going to ask a couple more questions. I think the first one might be quite a quick one, Ian, for you, from Karen. How do you deal with confidentiality on the Yammer group?
Oh yeah, that's not a quick answer, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Yeah, we have come across some challenges with that around. It's people are quite good generally at sort of sharing challenges they have, and they realise it's an open group and things. Where we've had some issues with regarding somebody having they're under performance management, and that then caused some issues then around that, and so we had to call a stop to that thread, and it's something we keep an eye on. And we remind people that it's an open channel. It's there's no restrictions on it, but we just have to keep a very close eye on making sure that it doesn't go down the wrong route, because there have been some unintended consequences by some of the posts on there.
Right.
But we did talk about, should we have proper moderators assigned to it and different things, and actually we don't want to restrict it, because for the 99% of the time it is absolutely supportive and helpful and works really well.
Right. Yeah, good answer. And it's that real dichotomy, isn't it, between wanting to keep it open because that's what it's there for, and not moderated, but on the understanding that 99% of the time it's appropriate stuff, but occasionally somebody might not get it quite right. I have a question from Craig, which I think might be more for Harry, but Ian, if you've got any contribution, we'd love to hear it, obviously. Craig is hugely interested in terms of where he can get information and direction on how we can change the approach to recruitment. Can anyone make any recommendations? So I'm guessing on this one, it's kind of, how do you start? How do you start making those changes to the process? Where to begin?
So, I mean, it's something we do at Lexic all the time, I suppose, through multiple channels. I think either if it's like training for those involved in actually doing the process, hiring managers, recruiters, etc. So we do regularly is kind of have workshops and webinars on just how to help understand what neurodiversity is, avoid unconscious bias, what they can do differently in recruitment practices, little things they can do differently. And I think similarly, if you're looking at kind of auditing recruitment processes, so what we do regularly, just kind of looking at on a step-by-step basis, similar to what I showed in our slides, kind of the kind of steps we go through, kind of understanding what you're doing at each stage and what you can do differently to make it more neuro-inclusive. So those would be the two things that we would look at, I think, from a recruitment perspective.
Yeah. Ian?
So with Harry on it's awareness, first of all. So you need to raise awareness in the business about it, and sharing things like I mentioned that video earlier. I think went into the chat pane. Sharing that video around just to get people to understand the challenges that people have with it. But then when it actually comes to making the changes, start at the beginning. Start at the JD. That is your starting point. Your job description, the advert, and then start to think through the process, putting yourself in somebody's shoes about how they would experience the process, and just make those changes. And you're not going to get it right first time. Just start making the changes and work through each step of the way.
Yeah, brilliant. It's important to take action, and to take action, and so often we don't because we're scared of getting it wrong. And actually, let's just stay as we are because then we're safe. Well, we can't move forward without taking action. I want to say again a huge thank you to Ian and to Harry for joining me this afternoon. I have learned loads. I've got lots of questions still buzzing around in my head. We've got some questions that we haven't answered and we will come back to. So if you've asked a question and we haven't come back to you, we will come back to you after the webinar. Just give us a couple of days to look at those and ask Ian and Harry for their comments. A huge thank you to each and every one of you who has joined the session today. We've had a busy chat room again, which has been brilliant to see because it just emphasises to me that people are very interested in the subject and feel safe to ask a question. So thank you to everybody for joining us. And to Caroline for handling the chat room as well, which is a massive help for me. I have learnt loads. I would definitely recommend that if you're not already connected with Ian and with Harry on LinkedIn, then you make time to do so because they both share information in relation to what's going on in their organisations. So it just remains for me to say a big thank you again, Ian and Harry, and to everyone who has joined the Intuitive Knowledge session this afternoon. I wish you a good rest of the day, a lovely evening, and a good rest of the week. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.